This episode is such a public day special as we discuss language equality on the internet.
Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Building for Bharat. Today we have a special episode on language equality on Indian internet. I have the pleasure of an eminent panel with me. The panelists are Mr. Ratan Kesh, EVP and Head Retail Operations and Services Axis Bank, Mr. Deepu KV, President Head Operations and Customer Service Bajaj Allianz, Ms. Manasi Narasimhan, Vice President Marketing South Asia at Mastercard, and Mr. Arvind Pani, CEO and co-founder Reverie Language Technologies. Welcome everyone. It's fascinating. Only about 26% of global internet audience browse in English, and yet nearly 60% of the content on the web is in English. India is linguistically the most diverse nation on earth with more than 19,500 languages and dialects, which is both an opportunity and a huge challenge, especially for digital businesses which have been barely scratched the surface so far. While in 2011, English internet users were close to 68 million and local language users were close to 48 million, 5 years ago, English users were at 175 million, whereas there were 235 million in local language users. Compare that to last year, where there were close to 200 million English users, but 536 million Indian language internet users. So 90% of internet users prefer to use internet in their local language to search and carry out tasks online. And in 2020, Google search queries for translate increased by over 50%. So in this context, let's get this panel started. My first question goes to Arvind. Arvind, how different is the experience of an Indian language internet users versus an English speaker, and why does it matter?
Thank you so much for having me on the show today, along with our dear friends from the industry. So, I'm going to answer your question by really starting with an interesting story that all of us probably have heard or read as kids. And this is the story from the Panchatantra about the stork and the fox. The stork and the fox, they were friends, and it so happened that the fox invited the stork over to his house and offered the stork meal in a flat plate. And the stork obviously couldn't have it. Now, that is the situation that today we are having in India on the internet for English and Indian language users, right? Which is what we call as inequality of access or inequality of experience. So there was no ill intention when the fox had invited the stork over for the meal. But then the fox is used to consuming the food in a flat plate. But the stork needs a different kind of a mode to be able to consume that meal. Now, today the internet in India has really been designed very well for English users, and it is not very well designed for the non-English users. So that is where the inequality of access comes, right? Now, I will just explain a little bit about what I mean by the equality or inequality of access. If you take internet out of the equation, if we take newspapers, if we take television, if we take radio, then there is equality of access in all of these media. The Indian language users don't have to do anything different compared to the English users in these media that I just mentioned. Because television, you just flip channels, radio, you tune into any channel you want, newspaper, you pick up any newspaper you want to read, whether it is English or your own language, and you do that. Now, thereby, what happens is that more than 90 to 95% of the engagement in those media actually happens in Indian languages. And there is serious usage that happens in Indian languages. But internet today still is kind of, it's very well designed for English users. They find it very convenient, but serious usage on the internet by Indian language users is still not happening. Now, the other thing that is also happening is because it is designed for English first, psychologically the Indian users, when they get onto the internet, they feel that we are inferior, and the internet is meant for educated people. And when then you actually ask them that what do you mean by internet is meant for educated people, they say that the people who are English literate, who can access the internet, they are educated. Now, even though this audience, the people who are saying this may be educated in their language, but they feel that they are not educated and therefore they can't access the internet. Now, why it is important? For that also, I would like to share. It's not a story; it's a real life incident that I experienced with an individual, and this is a gentleman that I was speaking with uh, who studied in Hindi medium up to class eighth, and around end of class eighth, he started exploring career options, and he realized that engineering and medical could be good career options. This I'm talking about like in the 90s. So, but he was not aware that to be able to pursue either education in engineering or medical, he can't do that in Hindi language. So that was a revelation to him. So he switched against his wish to Hindi medium in class ninth. So apart from preparing for your board exams, academics, and preparing for engineering, so this gentleman also had to learn English pretty well in starting from class 9, and you can imagine how difficult it would have been for that individual. So he wrote all the exams, all the major engineering entrance examinations, including IIT, and he got through IIT. And could you believe that he actually went ahead and secured all India rank 1 in the IIT joint entrance examination, right? Now just come to think of it. So, for one person who made that change, there are millions of students in India in, say, non English medium who actually don't make that change, who continue to think that professional education is available only in English language. So, it is important because if we do not make the internet equitable, accessible, we will never be able to realize the true potential of the internet itself in India. Second, if you really look at the fundamental rights that we have in our constitution, right to education, right to justice, almost all the fundamental rights, it is not possible that these fundamental rights can be accessed by the citizens of India without really having a fundamental right to choose their language in the medium that they engage. And uh, uh, And the last thing that I would like to mention is that when we are also doing businesses, the users are having a different kind of experience when they are dealing in person, whether they go to a bank branch or to a physical store. But when they come onto the internet, the they feel left out because it's all in English. So that personalized engagement that happens in a physical store usually happens in their language, but that is not there in on the internet. So that is why it really matters that for tapping the true potential and even for our economic growth, that we make the internet equitable for all language speakers and not just English.
A question to Mr. Deepu. So, according to you, what does language equality on the internet imply for your sector and organization?
Thank you, Shri. I think Arvind has laid the context, quite nicely in terms of his example, regarding the stock and the fox. So for us, in line with the philosophy of caringly yours, the objective is to ensure access to our customers in the language that they're comfortable with. For example, if you look at crop insurance, since we offer a range of insurance products, and we are talking about farmers who typically live in the rural parts of India and for whom English is not a natural language of choice, we came out with a mobile app exclusively for them in Indian languages. And they could use this app to interact with us. They could use this app to interact with the government. And when COVID happened and they had to, so to speak, work from home, this became a lifeline for them, a real boon. Because using this app in the language of their choice, they could interact with us, they could interact with the government. And given that rural markets are characterized by asymmetry of information, since there is an absence of organized marketplaces, we were able to give them a lot of notifications on the weather. We were able to give them crop advisories. We were able to give them crop diagnostics. We were able to give them information on pricing, so on and so forth. So much so that through sheer word of mouth, downloads picked up. Our rating on the App Store was in excess of 4.5 at one point in time. And this was a unanimous choice for the Global EFMA Accenture Innovation in Insurance Award in 2020. So that's just one example of how we've been able to ensure access for our customers in the multiple languages. And even if you look at our website, for example, we have access for customers in languages other than English. Even our AI driven chatbot is available in language other than English. So the idea is to ensure that we give access for our array of digital assets to customers across multiple languages, and this is live. So that's clearly how we've been able to up the ante.
So fascinating to hear the opportunities unlocked, Deepu, by just creating access in local languages. Thank you for sharing that. Mansi, what does it mean for language equality on internet for your sector?
Thank you so much, Sri, first of all, for having me here on this panel. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here. To me, language equality on the internet is a given, especially in these times when the lines between India and Bharat are completely blurring. And in the context of Mastercard and in the payments ecosystem that we operate in, the pandemic has seen a step jump in the adoption of digital payments from tier 5, 6, 7 India, from first-time digital payments users, many of whom are an older demographic, not as familiar with digital payments, and therefore the only way to handhold them, to reassure them, to educate them about the safety, the security, and the tremendous utility of digital payments is by talking in their language, in the tone and manner that they understand. And therefore, to my mind, language equality is a must, and it's actually only the starting point of what we need to do.
Thank you, Mansi. Mr. Ratan, what does internet equality in your sector mean?
Thanks, Sri, for having me here. Delighted to be part of this panel and looking forward for some really meaningful conversation as part of the panel discussion today. You asked me about language inequality. In my mind, the reality is that most of our conversations, especially in the banking and financial sectors, we do use English, Hindi, and to an extent English, and therefore a large part of our growth engine, which is to come from Bharat, um, at times it is possible that they are not gaining the full benefit of banking and financial services. So that to me is a bit of an inequality, and it is a responsibility on all of us, the BFSI players, the entire ecosystem of digital partners, fintech partners, as well as government to come together and really remove that inequality. We as banks have been really taking few steps in our small ways. For example, we now have a Hindi website which has got most of the frequently asked questions written in Hindi and answered in Hindi. Um, the forms that we ask customers to fill it in, they have been converted into local languages, and we actually laminated those and sent it out to the branches so that the customer can use that as a reference and fill the forms. um, we do have voice bot on our call centers, which allows Hindi, English, and we are right now working on 14 regional languages to be included into the voice bot, and that would then eventually integrate with using speech to text technology to the WhatsApp bot. And of course, we are on our course to really create our mobile app, which will be multilingual. And the plan is pretty much in place. We are working with some of the very interesting partners who are helping us with the technology development for this specific area.
Thank you, Ratan. Arvind, back to you. We are the second largest internet market, and more than 550 million, close to 550 million people are language first users, yet there is a huge divide. So, what are some challenges for regional language internet? How is it different for voice search and text? And how has the localization evolved in India?
Yeah, sure, Sri. So I will really touch upon two big challenges. One is when we are talking about the the local languages. Even when you mentioned about voice and text, it's a very fragmented approach that we have adopted, right? We are talking about content translation, we are talking about text, we are talking about voice. But if we really look at the big picture, what are all of these things supposed to do, or what are all of these things supposed to deliver? They are, in fact, supposed to have a totality of great experience, customer experience, user experience by the end users, right? So today I see that how all of these technologies will come together to deliver a very rich experience, exactly the way the English language users are experiencing, right? That approach is somehow missing. Okay, we are still trying to really figure out how we can put all of these dots together. The second big challenge which is there is really lack of standardization, and I'm extremely surprised that uh, that it continues to be so. Now, standardization for Indian languages, you would be surprised to know that are defined not in India, and the companies who are representing Indian languages, they are largely not Indian companies. Even the people who represent Indian languages don't understand the nuances of Indian languages very well. I will give you a very simple example. There are multiple things which are part of standardization, but I'll give you a very simple example. If we today say that how many alphabets are there in English, there is universal truth, it is 26. Anywhere we go, anybody we ask, that's the response that we get. And this is something that is taught to us in our schools, right? Now, if we ask anybody, let's say even Hindi, which has got 40% representation in Indian languages, constitutionally, there are 11 languages, sorry, 22 languages that have been identified with official status in our constitution. But even if we take Hindi and as an extension any other Indian language, and we ask that how many characters are there in Indian languages, we will not get a consistent answer, right? You would be surprised to know that to our kids in schools, there are 52 characters which are taught in the books which are there, okay, which are standardized books. But our standards which are digitally there for Hindi language, there are 72 characters. So there are 20 more characters which have been added, which are foreign to these people. And when these kids grow up and they start using the internet, they get introduced to these kind of characters. They don't know what these characters are. It's very similar to if somebody told us today that English has got 35 characters, we would struggle to find out what these nine additional characters are or alphabets are and how do we use those. So similarly, Indian language typing has never been standardized. There is no standard keypad. For English, there is QWERTY across the board, whether it is mobile, whether it is laptop. QWERTY is a de facto standard. For Indian language, that standard is not there. So, because of this lack of standardization, what is also happening is there is the digital literacy. We don't teach our kids in schools how to use the internet in their own language, in their mother tongue. So, therefore, when they grow up, and when they find that there is no standardization and they have never been taught how to use the internet in their language, they struggle. And that is where this debate of voice and text also keeps coming. So to address your second question that you asked about where does voice and text have a role and how what is the interplay, I would say that these are complementary technologies, right? They don't exist in isolation, and they have to come together, like I mentioned, to deliver a totality of experience. For example, if we do a voice search, then we don't expect all the results to be read out to us in voice. The results will be displayed, which will be a combination of images, text, right? And then we can continue that once again with a voice search. So that's the continuity of that. So voice and text, and for that matter, any other technology that we are talking about, like bots, okay, and on IVR, of course, will have a voice play over there. All of these things will come together to deliver complementing and rich experience. Very similar to how different technologies, even in English, voice and text come together to deliver a rich experience. That's a totality of experience that we are delivering to the end users. So that is how I would see it is it panning out for English and sorry for Indian languages. And again, it is like our endeavor should be to bring equality of experience for both English as well as Indian languages.
Mr. Ratan, question to you. As per a KPMG Nielsen study in 2016, 58% cited limited local language content and platform as one of the biggest barrier for digital payments among non-English internet users in India. Compare this, only 9% said lack of awareness about the category. So, what are your thoughts regarding this, and how do you say Axis Bank has worked around this? How do you plan to tap this opportunity?
Yeah, great question. While you mentioned that the KPMG Nielsen study is little dated 2016, but the reality is that those numbers may have changed quite a bit over the last 4 5 years. because most of the companies, including BFSI as well as digital partners, the payment product ecosystem, all have been working towards really bringing a lot more of local languages into the foray of for the users to utilize. But the reality is that today, even today, you see uh, 50% of the internet users among our 1.3 billion population are actually largely coming from the metro and urban centers. The non-users are mostly from the small town and the villages. The print media and the TV broadcasting companies have solved this problem in a big way. They are across every local um part of the country, and they are able to communicate more effectively. But digital media is yet to solve the problem in a sense comprehensively. Some of the e-commerce companies are using multilingual apps, but the banks and financial institutions are, I would say, are lacking in that space. But as I mentioned some time back, we do have clear plan in place. We are today in our call center, we have given option for customer to choose the language options, which means you can choose what is your preferred language first time, and every time you call, we will hopefully land you to an agent who speaks that language, because in our call centers we do have people who speak 16 different languages. I mean, we have got capability for that. We have got people from those local geographies who are employed specifically for servicing that kind of thing. In fact, what we do is that if a call is originating from let's say Chandigarh, we know that the customer is more likely to talk in Hindi, and therefore we route it to an agent who speaks Hindi. If the call is routing from West Bengal, we route it to an agent who is preferably to speak in Eastern language, whether it is Bengali or Odia. So we do have some of these facilities created. We have pretty much a plan in place for our multilingual mobile app, and some of the transfer payments and etc., which are simpler ones, which are already being moved into some of the local languages. So these are few small steps, I would say. The larger part of the solution has to come through from a lot more technology backed solution, because as much we talk about converting everything into local languages, it is very important to have the very strong technology ecosystem and architecture in place, and therefore make a meaning out of it. And a lot of investment are already happening on the technology. We are working with some of the cool partners to develop in that space. So it's a bit of a work in progress for us.
Thank you, Ratan. Arvind, back to you. We are the second largest internet market, and more than 550 million, close to 550 million people are language first users, yet there is a huge divide. So, what are some challenges for regional language internet? How is it different for voice search and text? And how has the localization evolved in India?
That's a great question about language equality on the internet. And as in the new normal, digital payments acceptance has gone way beyond the metros into tier 4, 5, 6 India. And the only way to communicate to this demographic is to communicate in the language of their choice. And I give you two specific examples. One is what's called tokenization, which is an RBI mandate, which is a technical term for storing your card credentials in a safe and secure manner on e-commerce sites. And this obviously involves a change in consumer behavior. And again, we had to educate cardholders on the benefits and the process of this. So we pushed out an infographic and vernacular content across India in December. And that got us a reach of over 40 million vernacular consumers. So that was one tangible example that we've done. The other big part about digital payments acceptance is the small kirana store owner. And these have been the lifeblood of the Indian economy. This is like your friendly neighborhood chemist and your bhajiwala and your doodhwala. Getting them into the digital payments ambit has also been a huge concerted activity from us. And we've had a campaign that's been running now for over 3 years called Team Cashless India, which really involves our brand ambassador MS Dhoni exhorting merchants to go digital. And this is again done at a local retailer association, street by street level. So that's the second example of where we've really gone local into the hinterlands to make this happen.
Thank you, Manasi. Mr. Deepu, question to you. There is a real surge in terms of retail investors coming from newer markets, East, HSM, Orissa, so on. But if you look at most of the literature around investor education, retail investments, etc., they're all in English, right? And in case some, there are some instances where people's lack of access to the right information led to a debacle in their stocks and so on, right? So there is a dichotomy. There are new retail investors coming from non-English speaking regions, and there is more and more divide in this language. So as a company, what are you doing to make sure the access to the right financial information is available and they're taking a good shot to be part of the growing opportunity in the space?
It's a good question, Shri. And building on what I said earlier in terms of going where the customer is and ensuring access to our array of services in the language of their choice. Two principles, Shri, to add to what I said earlier. I think one is it's about using a good combination of man and machine, because we all have heard about the difference between translation and transliteration. So even as you ensure access to customers, you need to ensure that it's not just the letter, but even in the spirit of how you service, you need to have a good combination of man and machine. So even if you when you make assets available in local languages, in terms of understanding the customer's exact need and getting back to him, with speed and accuracy, you need to have digital hand holding, and therefore you need to have assisted automation. So I think that's one principle which underlies all our efforts. The other is from a UI UX perspective, as in user interfaces and user experience. Like I mentioned to you, one is apps in local languages. Farm Mitra, our app for crop insurance customers, right? It's exclusively in Indian languages. That's one. The other is today, going back to the voice and text to voice, example that Arvind and Ratan spoke about. See, there is a range of assets available. For example, when you look at devices, right? Typically, you have a keyboard which has characters in a particular language. But if you, let's say, move into a virtual keyboard, right, which can pop up depending on the language of the customer's choice, then you're no longer stuck to a static physical keyboard, right? That's one way by which you can enhance it. The other is also ensuring that when you move from English to Indian languages, it's also about how you can leverage multilingual customers, right? Because that's one area by which you can prevent balkanization of information, right? If you look at Wikipedia today, 15% of customers are multilingual, and if you look at Twitter, 11% of customers are multilingual. So I think that's one way by which we can basically ensure increasing access to customers. And I'll just round it off by saying that I think a good example to learn from is China, right? China, for example, zoomed 1,300% in just 10 years. And I think if you look at the fact that there are 536 million users of the internet in Indian languages, I think the only way to go is up, using the principles that I mentioned, which is combining man and machine and ensuring UI UX in the language of choice for the customer.
Thank you, Deepu. I like the idea of a virtual dynamic keyboard that changes according to the language. I think that's something that we should definitely try. So Ratan, question to you. There is a false ceiling that local language literates, they are relegated to only a QR code or OTP only access. They are seen as almost an illiterate. How can brands break this barrier and do more with that?
So indeed, it's a real problem for both the consumers as well as the brands and the banks like us, wherein while we've been able to bring, as the country as a whole, we've been able to bring lot many more customers into the digital footprint, wherein they are using the digital solution, especially for transfer of payment or making a transfer of money or making payments. The truth is that they often do it without knowing what they're getting into. They don't know the nuances, the terms and conditions that they're agreeing with the particular bank or the brand. And therefore, at some point when there is a dispute, a customer do come back and say, look, I didn't know. um, but the customer would have signed it up for it and then actually ended up doing the transaction, and therefore the risk were communicated in English. So you have a responsibility to solve that part of the problem. The second part of the problem I see is that many times, without knowing the nuances of it, they fall prey to some of the fraudsters, scamsters who are trying to defraud gullible customers, and misuse this opportunity of financial illiteracy, as I may call it. And therefore, it is our responsibility to educate our consumers about the safe banking practices in the regional language, as well as really communicate to them about the terms and conditions, the most important um, terms that they're agreeing with. And therefore, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to use more of WhatsApp bot as a solution, which is more preferred channel these days, becoming more and more. And in the mobile app, we are trying to use the technology of speech to text and text to speech, wherein in the speech to text scenario, the customer can give the instruction saying, I want to do transfer of a fund, or I want to do XYZ. How do I do it? It will spell out as to how it can be done, and also talk about a couple of risks associated with this and what the customer should be aware of. B, we are also creating the FAQ, or the important terms and condition, wherein customer can click a button, which is, while it is written in English and the regional languages, customer can click the button and then it will read out the text into a speech form for the customer to understand and know the nuances of it. So I think these technologies today are available. We are trying to use some of these technologies, stitch it together within the mobile app and the WhatsApp bot solution to be able to support the customer, to bring them more, make them more financially literate, rather than really converting it into a more QR code and financially illiterate customer. So that's our game plan.
And Mansi, generally any brand, not just Mastercard, right? So what do you think they can do to reach out, engage, and kind of build on, local language speakers and this audience?
Absolutely. I think it's vital that the marketing fraternity and the business fraternity have a discussion on this, because to my mind, starting with languages is the starting point. I think it's about understanding the true nuance that is Bharat, the many differences, not just in language, but in attire, in festivals, in food, in behavior. And this is something that, especially as marketers, we should take pride in leading. And it requires extensive immersion to understand these nuances. But when we do that is when we really start talking to this consumer. And when we really start talking is when behavior change happens.
Thank you, Mansi. Mr. Deepu, question to you. So, how do you envisage the future of life insurance and financial products in a digitally inclusive Indian internet?
I can talk about general insurance because I'm basically from that industry. So when you talk about products and services, I'll just expand your question to cover both products and services. So I told you about the app called Farm Mitra, right, which we use for farmers, whereby they can avail of a range of services, using the app. So clearly that becomes the platform. And during COVID-19, we saw that Shri, specifically since you asked about the future of products on the internet, all our launches were digital. So today it's not about necessarily calling for a physical press conference, and then having a product launch. You can do it digitally. And when you do it digitally, you can also have multiple versions. So for example, when we came out with various apps and their extensions during COVID-19, we were able to come out with them in multiple languages because we needed to ensure that we cater to our entire set of customers. That's clearly one we have seen. The other is going to the points made by my various co-panelists today. Shri, what we've also seen is as we get into tier 4, tier 5 cities, it's no longer about a one size fits all approach. It's also about coming out with, let's say, sachet sized products or bite sized products, which cater to these unique needs of people in these cities and towns and villages, and then ensuring that from a distribution perspective, from a product launch perspective, from a servicing perspective, you don't get into the stock and fox paradigm or paradox, right? You clearly are there to service them depending on the unique needs of that set. And we're already seeing this in motion. You already have, for example, we may have brick and mortar offices in the big cities, but we have digital offices in the smaller cities. We have our digital assets available across this entire range. Even when you look at it from a hiring perspective, we have digitized our hiring process. You don't need to travel to a big city for an interview. You can walk into a cyber cafe or get into a discussion with our robot which hires you in the small city, and then it conducts an automated assessment, and then based on the short list we get into further interviews. So whether it is hiring, whether it's product launch, I covered the entire gamut of products and services. Clearly, I think digital in the language of the customer's choice is here to stay.
Similar question for all of you. You can take it one by one. So, according to a report that came out last year by IAMAI, rural internet audience are growing 3 times faster and is quickly, catching up to the urban audience. In fact, they're likely to surpass. So with that kind of unprecedented growth from, let's say, local language internet users, with that kind of growth, what would be a favorable policy in the country? That's one. And second, what is your personal commitment to make the digital community more democratized? So I think each one of you can take it and conclude it.
So I think in the payments industry, we're very fortunate that the government and the RBI are very committed to working with industry, policymakers, private enterprise to drive the common goal of driving digital payments. And I think everybody realizes that it takes an industry and an ecosystem to change consumer behavior. And they've, I think, been very encouraging and forthcoming in terms of this education. And I think that's what we would continue to work with them on. Mastercard has always been a trusted partner of the Indian government and of the RBI in driving the adoption of digital payments. And that's what we'll continue to do. I think taking it further, I think my promise will be that we need to really think local. We need to think hyper local, not think in English or Hindi, which is tempting, and just saying translate kar do. I think that's too superficial for the times that we live in. I think it's got to be much more nuanced. And that would be our commitment as Mastercard, that all the campaigns we run will have that element of local understanding.
Yeah, I mean, like everything else, there is need for the policymakers to A, give some mandates, and B, partner in really developing solutions. You see, when a few years back we've been talking about the fact that banking does not exist in the rural part of the country. Today in Jandhan accounts, uh, we've got roughly around 68 crore customers have come into the foray. How has it happened? I mean, it has happened with some bit of support from the ecosystem, with technology, as well as UIDI and the NPCI supporting it. Also, some bit of a mandate from the regulators and the government to force the companies to go in that journey. I think similar thing has to happen here as well. I would expect that the companies would be mandated. And here, when I say companies, it's not just banks and financial institutions, but the entire ecosystem of companies within, including healthcare, education, insurance, digital companies, fintech players, all have to come together, and some bit of a mandate to be given that they all should be proliferating the local and regional languages. And the benefit is actually for them, because they can get lot many more customer who will use these product and solutions. So that's one thing that I would expect. The second, of course, are my request to all the technology partners and the fintech players. We are seeing a huge amount of startups community really proliferating in the country, and I would expect the startup community to come up and provide simple, scalable, inexpensive solutions which we all can utilize as larger companies, and take these solutions to the rest of the Bharat, where the customers will get benefit, and we also gain the benefit of people coming into the mainstream of banking footprint.
So in terms of the fact that yes, internet users, in rural markets have far exceeded, customers in urban markets. I think from our perspective, it's very clear. Our plans for business growth and servicing, clearly include, the whole Indian geography. And there are two, three aspects, which we keep in mind here. One, of course, is the use of data and analytics. I think that becomes extremely important to ensure that, you're truly customer centric. The other is, customer segmentation. Like I said, you don't get into a one size fits all scenario. And clearly through the combination of data and customer, you come out with, a dynamic set of, digitally enabled products and services, from time to time. So I think that's clearly our philosophy. Yeah. I think Arvind, I'll just take a cue from what Arvind had mentioned earlier, in terms of the fact that, when it comes to the availability of the internet, when it comes to, devices, I gave that example of, a dynamic virtual keyboard. So that way across the entire, set of, services and products that the government has, right? Because the government can be a very, very effective stakeholder, in this entire ecosystem. If you can ensure, language neutral access, it will not only be a win-win for customers and firms, but it will also clearly, usher in, growth in all areas for the entire nation.
So, Sri, I actually have three asks from our policymakers. One I have already covered, which is about standardization. And standardization is really akin to on infrastructure. So it's like saying that if we have great cars in India, but we do not have roads, then there is no use having those cars, right? So similarly, having having a potential user base of 550 million internet users, if they can't use the internet for serious usage, then we can't really tap the potential. So that's why standardization is important. My first ask is that India owns the standardization of our languages instead of, and then give it to the governing bodies for implementation of that. And it's the other way around today, where there are governing bodies who are defining standards and giving it to us to really follow. So that's number one. The benefit of that one is that if you really look at, so China's internet contribution to their GDP is close to 10%, whereas in India it's not even 1%, it is minuscule. So we need to get there. So that's my ask number one. My ask number two is introducing digital literacy in Indian languages at school level, so that people get used to using internet and digital in their languages. And of course, my third ask is that for the government to also start mandating in some way that if we have to reach out to citizens for G2C services, and even for companies to reach out to the consumers, the company who are reaching out to consumers, how can they start making it available in the official languages that have been recognized with official status in our constitution? So these are my three asks. Now, my commitment, and through Reverie, I mean, uh, uh, Reverie has been working on this problem since 2009. It's been more than 12 years that we have been working on this one. And we have a singular vision that I would like to really see a day when the Indian language users don't have to rely on English to be able to use the internet and get what they want. So, what I mean by that is the need of a consumer is language agnostic. Okay. And if there could be a day where, as part of KYC, know your customers, the preference of language could be captured, preference of language communication could be captured, and does not matter through which channel this consumer is actually interacting with our business or with government services, whether it is on website or it is an app, whether it's a chat bot, whether it is an IVR, then I really don't have to rely on English at all, and immediately my engagement can start happening in my language. So that is where Reverie is committed to working with our friends in business and government, like some of the my co-panelists who are there here, Ratan, Deepu, and Manasi, to make that their journey, their business journey, their engagement with their end consumers, independent of English language, but as delightful as easy in Indian languages. That is what we have been working on. That is what Reverie's focus in terms of product and technologies has been, and that is what we will continue to do.